Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. I am the Diggly Doodah Doc, Mr. Papatoe Panther, here with the Wobbly Wildcard for another episode of the Niggly Niche Cast from the Knobbly Niche Cache. You can support the Niche Cache straight up the guts on Patreon, and we're also dropping our email newsletter today because it's Friday. We drop those Monday and Friday, and we usually write a bit of extra content that goes straight to your email inbox. Like today I wrote a bit about the Warriors and the Redcliffe Dolphins announcing their partnership, as well as the simmering rivalry from between City Kickboxing, Eugene Behrman, Junior Fa, and the Joseph Parker camp, which there was a low-key, I don't think many people are subscribed to Combat TV, but there was a low-key interview with Eugene Behrman on Combat TV touching on the recent buzz around Junior Fa versus Joseph Parker. So it's just a small example of what we serve up through that email hitter twice a week. And today on the episode, we're going to talk about the NBL draft, which was pretty cool, pretty exciting, different. We've got some Flying Kiwis chat. We got Daryl Mitchell moving from Northern District's Knights down to Canterbury in the cricket realm. And we'll also do a little bit on that Warriors Redcliffe Dolphins partnership as well. Wobbly Wildcard. Kia ora talofa namaste. And the big cheers. What is coming up in your email today?
Well, I'll write it after we record it, which means it'll be published before anyone hears this podcast. So, whatever I say, I've got to stick to. I definitely going to write today about this thing about the Wellington Phoenix, stirring up this conversation, and in the wake of the thing about the 2023 Women's Football World Cup and the possibilities of bringing that to Australia and New Zealand, which is looking as bright as ever right now after they got a good score on the old, whatever you call it, feasibility rankings or whatever FIFA are up to with those things. And then the Wellington Phoenix dropped this line being like, well, we're still committed to getting a women's team in the W League over in Australia as well. It's like, well, okay, you're committed to it, but is there any news to... No, you're just sort of reminding us that, okay, sweet as. But it is a pretty fascinating idea, and I will definitely write about that today. It's just whether I think it might be a bit too hefty of a thing for the email newsletter, so I'm not 100% sure on where we'll go with that. We might... I might find some various inspirations throughout the talking on this podcast, maybe the NBL or maybe some of the wider sporting conversations that are being had around the world at the moment. We'll see how that goes.
We did have the first NBL or even like sports draft in Aotearoa with the NBL draft. For those who don't know, it's the National Basketball League in Aotearoa. And for those who don't know, times two, basketball is one of the most popular sports in Aotearoa. And just before we get into the draft and into how the draft was packaged and just the more specific stuff around the draft wildcard, and watching the draft and having this, we both have a background knowledge of, where basketball sits in the Kiwi sporting landscape, and it's pretty damn important to me. So I view it as like a interesting moment for basketball in Aotearoa, considering the creativity around putting together this NBL competition, considering the pandemic and all that stuff that went into creating this situation. And I think it reflects the standing of basketball in Aotearoa, where, there's a draft, there's a bit of excitement in the basketball community, and also wildcard, just when I was watching this draft, I wasn't aware of how many players from Aotearoa were part of like Australian NBL teams, like as development players or just random pickups and so on and so forth, let alone the plethora of players who go to college systems in the USA. I think there were a couple of mentions of different players spending time in Europe as well. Like, it's a combination of the creativity and urgency to get this revamped NBL out, and I think it was a cool idea, well done, well executed, generates a bit of buzz and hype. But then also I was exposed to the basketball depth, and I can't say talent because I haven't seen many of these guys play, but it definitely opened my eyes to the world of basketball in Aotearoa and the importance of basketball in our sporting landscape at the moment. So how do you feel about that? Like, just how this draft and how the depth, like we had 10, 12 rounds of 7 players being picked, and that signals a decent amount of depth in basketball talent. And just the whole package to me reflects basketball standing in Aotearoa, which I don't think many people pay that much attention to because it's not rugby, it's not cricket, and they kind of sleep on the growth and expansion of basketball in Aotearoa.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common complaint from in the basketball community that just the funding for that sport is nowhere near on par to what it should be, considering just how many people watch and play and support and follow the sport in this country. Like, not just picking an NBA team and going with that, but I mean actual like grassroots basketball here. And yeah, I mean the depth of it is pretty impressive to fill out. Not just to fill out 84 players worth of roster spots for this sort of hybrid league that they've got this year, but also, like, let's not forget that a lot of the top players weren't available for whatever reason. Like, probably all of the starting 5 of the Tall Blacks, if they were to play tomorrow and everyone was available, I don't think any of them would be in this conversation here for various reasons. But it is. I mean, I'm a little. I don't want to dig any holes or anything around here, but like because I've said this before in other podcasts. I understand why a lot of the top players don't want to play, and I think just the format of this league this season, which is a unique one-off. Like, this draft isn't going to be an every year kind of thing. It's just this time in order to kind of make the best of a bit of a strange situation. A compromised situation from a number of angles. Like, I completely understand why it wasn't really in the best interest of the top players to participate. I think some of the complaints, maybe, like, I just think there's a way you can just sort of toughen up and do it if you really wanted to. But at the same time, if like guys got other contracts elsewhere, it's not like this doesn't have to be their priority or anything like that. Which is why it's still very cool that you have seen some of those guys from other Australian NBL teams. Mika Vakona, I don't know if he'll be back to play anymore. Although I did hear he was thinking of, like, he wants to like move into the front office type roles in terms of basketball once he's done. So I remember hearing him say that in an interview at one time. So I don't know if I think he might actually live in Brisbane these days. So he might go back over there, but I don't know that he'll play another season. I'm not sure. Maybe because he might want to push through to the Olympics, which was probably why he was still playing in the first place. But him coming back, fantastic, like outstanding credibility for the league to have someone like that. Jared Kenny as well is in the same boat, and then you got Tohi Smith-Milner as well. Let's not forget him. Which is 3 more ANBL players from Australian teams than you have from the Breakers involved. But you do have also just getting some of those development guys. And yeah, like last year was just a bit of a golden year in some ways because for whatever reason, there just were a lot of Kiwis at other teams. Sometimes you only get just a couple, like a little handful that are around. Sometimes a year like this comes along and you've got fellas all over the show, which is awesome. Yeah, it's cool. And I think the way they've handled the draft was pretty, God, I don't know if flawless is the right word, but it was smooth and it was just done well. It was done proficiently, having the having just like an established, because I think absolutely crucial to this thing working was being able to do it in a sort of cinematic way, having that live TV broadcast, making an event of the draft. Not just having it as like a little gimmick, but actually turning it into like a focal point, a real sort of like dawning of this season. And to do that, just having the expertise of Sky TV's broadcast crew, and also obviously the three head honchos of Sky TV's broadcasting, on-screen talent there, and Hugh Bain and Andrew Mulligan and Casey Frank, great man, Casey. I always love watching Casey Frank. Casey Frank's one of those, like, all three of those guys are fantastic, but Casey Frank's one of those dudes who you just smile listening to him talk. He's just got that buzz about him. So that was fantastic, pretty well executed, and I've got a few issues, and I've heard issues from teams that have dropped out and stuff like that who have much more significant issues, and just in the way that this sort of like hybrid league has come around, and I think the timing of it is now looking a bit awkward that we're in level 1 and they could have had crowds, and they, like, by the time the league is like, they sort of rushed it through in order to get something out on the board. And now it sort of looks like maybe they rushed it a little bit too quick. They could have done it properly. They could have had teams hosting their own things. Not like every game here is going to be at Trust Arena in Waitakere, for example. So, like, maybe that wasn't completely necessary as it is. But I think at the same time, even if the singular league has a few issues and you can make some complaints about it, sure, whatever. But at the same time, I just think the spectacle of that draft and the fact that they've been able to do this in a way which, even if it's caught some negative attention as well, it has caught a lot of attention. Like, it's pushing basketball to a wider perspective, and it's kept it in, and kept this league in particular in the news cycles throughout the whole lockdown and stuff like that. I think on the whole, you got to say that's a pretty, when it all comes out in the wash, that's going to be a pretty massive boost to the popularity, to the presence of this league within the sporting landscape of New Zealand. And I mean that can only be a great thing for, not only for all the players that we're talking about who are trying to make sort of like not fully professional, they're not getting professional contracts out of this, it's a semi-pro league, but they're getting some exposure, they're getting some prominence, and also just the league itself is getting both of those things too, which is a bloody good thing in my eyes. I think it's going to put the league in a good place, even come next year when hopefully the three top teams that aren't involved this time will be back, and everything will be back to normal, and you'll have imports and things like that. It's going to, by the time that comes around, I think you're going to have a whole lot more like new NBL fans who are going to be interested in following that, and bloody lovely to see.
Yeah, you mentioned like the players who aren't there and like dramas and setting it up. I definitely toe more a line of just like, this is how it is, and I'm just happy that I'm not happy or excited that it's here. I think I just appreciate how, just what it is, and how they've come to this point in offering something a little bit different. Like, I don't know, you can get it, like, I was actually thinking this about like getting into some of the details around the NBA restart, and I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole because it's, I don't know, it just makes my head hurt thinking about how different competitions are restarting and whatnot. But looking at the NBA restart, and like, I think a lot of those competitions in America, and Dana White and the UFC alluded to this, how difficult it is, and a lot of after hearing a couple of the details around the NBA restart, like, I'm not sure how the players are going to accept, the rules and regulations around them restarting. So it's just interesting to see different competitions coming with different urgency and different energy to get things set up. Let's get more into the details around the players who are involved. Otago Nuggets picked Jordan Ngatai number 1. Taranaki picked Daryl Rokawa in the first round as well. Manawatu picked Tom Vodonovich, number 3. Nelson Giants picked Mika Vakona. Canterbury picked Jack Salt. And then Franklin picked Dominique Kalman-Poto. And the Auckland Huskies selected Isaiah Mauriahuhu Liafa. And just on that wildcard, like, some of like the difference in variety, again, I'm not like a super basketball local knowledge guy, so I don't know many of these players, but just looking at the names, like, great cultural diversity, which also I think reflects the Aotearoa basketball community nicely. Like, there's Pākehā names, there's Māori names, there's Polynesian names. It's a beautiful thing. Who out of that first round specifically, like, what's the pick there where you're like, oh, obviously Mika Vakona coming back, that's a bit ooh, but I'm thinking more like many of these names people don't necessarily know. So in that first round, like, what was the most interesting selection or just the player to watch out for based on that first round?
I reckon, like, well, you gotta, because you had the whole pre-drafting thing as well, where if players fit a certain criteria, they could sort of like, they could agree to be drafted by a team in a whatever position ahead of time, which is a way that which is actually, I think it's a really clear, like, it's maybe my favorite part of this whole process, I guess aside from just the general exposure of it, was having that little compromise, because, you know, the reason why we're never going to have draft systems in other sports in this country is because it is kind of unfair on players to just tell them where to go, unless it's going to be like the NFL or the NBA, where it's like, well, it doesn't really matter where you go, you're going to be a millionaire within the first year, so you'll be sweet, like, deal with it. It's a little bit different if you're talking about like Super Rugby franchises or something like that, and it also undermines player development and internal player development, that kind of stuff. So it's not something you'd see elsewhere, but I think that pre-draft process found a really nice balance between those two, kind of like the usual way of doing things here, and then this sort of like glitz and glamour way of doing things for this, you know, singular 2020 season. So, for example, like, Jack Salt was pre-selected by Canterbury, which was a very much an open secret because he'd already signed with Canterbury. He was like their star dude. They had no intention of letting him go elsewhere, and because he already had an existing contract, it was one of the reasons he could be pre-drafted. I think Mika Vakona was pre-drafted too, being having his Nelson heritage that made him available to them. That's like Mika Vakona playing for the Nelson Giants is awesome. That's as good as it gets. But I think the main dude who's probably the focus is then Jordan Atai, because he's number 1 overall. You know, he's that's kind of like a golden tag he gets to wear for the rest of his career, was that he was the number 1 overall pick in the only draft that the Kiwi NBL is ever going to have. So, and also he's got a lot to prove too, Jordan Atai. I'm not sure if he had been playing for Wellington Saints. I don't know if he was meant to have played for them this year. I don't know. I didn't think too deeply about that kind of stuff. But like, he's obviously also off contract with the Breakers, and he's a dude who, when he's on form, he's an absolute gun shooter, but he has to, he has to also show a few other aspects of it. And he's one of those dudes who's always played better for the Tall Blacks. And I think there's a few people who fall in that category as well. There's just something about representing the country where, and just the general, like, the Tall Blacks culture is like top tier as far as Kiwi international teams go. And that brings out the best in a lot of players. And I think Jordan Atai is a dude who, playing with the Otago Nuggets, should, and, you know, first overall pick, that's going to give him a fair bit of license to be the dude, like, to be the guy, the top scorer, to, shoot a bunch of threes every game and just be a leading player and really show what he can do. And hopefully, for his sake, push his case towards getting another Aussie NBL contract down the line as well.
Looking a bit deeper into the draft, like, what was some surprising picks that perked your antenna up as well? In a positive sense, like, which players did you think were great value further down the draft?
Yeah, Jared Kenny going late in round 2 is a absolute steal. Like, that dude is gonna be, he's clearly just one of the most talented players in this draft. So Otago getting him late on, I mean, I tell you what, that's Jared Kenny at the point, Jordan Ngatai shooting guard, just a decent 1-2 combination for the Nuggets there. And the Nuggets in their first season back too, they were going to come back in 2021, but with this sort of like short-term hybrid season, they jumped the gun and stepped up a year early. So good for them. Yeah, I don't know. Everard Bartlett and Leon Henry going to the two Auckland teams late in round 3 is pretty good value as well. I think Tane Murray for the Auckland Huskies. Tane Murray's a dude who's just been on an absolute rise. He's still only like 18 or something like that. I mean, he'll presumably be going to college in the States soon-ish. He has played for the Tall Blacks. He was the big bolter in the last sort of big tour that they did. He's just like not mincing words or anything. He's straight up just one of the best up-and-coming prospects in the country. And yeah, I'm also curious to see, I'll throw one last name out at you. I'm also very curious to see how Rashid Al-Khalim goes for the Auckland Huskies, picked with the last pick of round 5. He is the only Breakers contracted person involved here. He's not a player for the Breakers. He's an old college buddy of Matt Walsh, unsurprisingly, who has come over as a sort of in a player development role. I think they said on the broadcast as well, he's going to be a bit of he's going to step into the team manager duties probably with the team this season as well. By account, seems like a top dude, and also a guy who has played professionally overseas. I don't think he ever made it to the NBA, but he did have a good college career playing with old Nate Walshy. And yeah, as to see what he can do, he'd be 34, 35, something like that. See what he offers to this league will be very interesting. I don't think he's the only import in the thing. I'm not actually sure about that, but he'd be one of the few. So, and just the fact that he's a Breakers team management type who's involved in this competition is in itself reason to have a peek and see what's up.
Like, just straight up and down, which team do you think has the best roster?
So I'm looking at them now, so I'm gonna have to sort of like figure this one out on my toes because I didn't see the end of the thing. I had football training, but I like what the Nuggets have got there. The Ngatai and Kenny, Chuck and Jordan Hunt as well. Where are we? Taranaki, Burukawa, Jones, Tamata, Ty Wynyard as well. That's an interesting one. I like what Nelson have got. I think Nelson have got a strong team, and I think Canterbury as well should be decent. And I'm pretty interested. I think both Franklin and the Auckland Huskies, I think they both had sort of open trail things beforehand. But I know the Huskies went pretty hard. And I think both Franklin and Franklin Bulls, Auckland Huskies, I think they both had open trails beforehand, but I know the Auckland Huskies just seem to, this might just be because they're putting things out there, whereas everyone is following the same things, but the Huskies seem to be going a little harder than most on the sort of like, the more modern analytical type of approach, and they there's a couple, and they were the team that picked Rashid Al-Khalim, Isaiah Liafa with their first pick was a bit of a surprise as well. Got good value with Leon Henry, Tane Murray. They'll be pretty interesting to see how they go. I mean, you can't pick and like make any kind of definitive call at this stage, but it'll be pretty interesting to see how the Huskies go. Just because I think this might just be a completely false impression, but it seems to me like maybe they just had a little bit more. And as a completely new team, they had this. They didn't have the same, some teams, obviously, the players they picked, they were protecting sort of like their dudes. They were going after players they already had contracted. They sort of, going with the existing models they had. The Huskies fresh on the scene, and they sort of had a little bit of a different approach to other teams. So, how that plays out when the actual games take place will be pretty fascinating, I reckon.
Beauty. I like it. And just on because obviously there's a novelty value when we get presented with a draft. Like, and we've heard, like, for example, they've mentioned like an NFL draft before, and everyone loves to look to, well, for starters, in New Zealand, we look to other countries all the time, and if anyone says anything from another country, it's put on a pedestal. But the draft concept, it's been mentioned a lot with like our kind of sports here in Australia and Aotearoa. What'd you make of the like having a draft process for a Kiwi sports league? Now, this one was a bit different, as you said. Like, some teams had a locked-in candidate based on those guidelines and those the factors that could allow you to be in that position. So it was a little bit strange and a little bit confusing. However, I just like to me, it just, what the draft does is it lays out the talent before you get busy in a competition, where a lot of these other sporting competitions, like whether it's the Warriors in the NRL, whether it's cricket, whether it's Super Rugby, many people don't know what is below the top level. Like, people aren't aware of which players coming through here, which players coming through there, quite often because many of these sports clubs and organizations, they don't bother to broadcast it. Like, they don't give a shit. But for a fan, having everything laid out at the start, to me, I think that's where I'm not sure if the draft thing fits into other sports, but just I like that idea of having the talent laid out before you get started, and you can see just how different clubs are building their roster. Like, it just seems more transparent for the fan to suss out like what teams doing which, how they come to their conclusions, and so on and so forth. And again, like, I don't think the draft process fits into other sports, so I'm not sure like the future of the draft in Aotearoa sports, but from a novelty factor and just seeing how the talent got laid out and was very easy to follow, I liked it.
Mate, you got me thinking there, right? Because I agree completely. I think the sort of, I used this word before, but I don't know, I can't think of a better one at the moment. Like, the credibility it gives to not just like the players who went first couple rounds, but like think about the players who went like the 10th, 11th, 12th rounds, or whatever it was up to. Like, them getting their names out on telly and showing, a lot of them are up and coming players too, looking to push through, and like, it's just, there's a level of acknowledgement that you get there, and also just having the squads like formed before your eyes. You see how things take shape, you see decision processes and stuff. I agree that I already went through some ideas before on why draft processes wouldn't really work in other sports. I mean, the obvious one that I didn't say anything about is that you just, like, you think of how it works in the NFL, NBA exactly the same. Like, how many players who play college rugby, college basketball, college NFL, college bloody football, as I suppose I'm obliged to call it, even though whatever. Like, there only a handful of them get drafted. Only a handful of them make it to the league. Like, it's a sort of like a hourglass effect, which is, you know, all the sand and only a little bit is coming through at a time, kind of thing. Like, it depends on having just an excess of disposable talent. And in New Zealand, we don't really have that. Not only do we not have that, I'm not sure we would really want that, because I think it's a bit of an inhumane way to treat people sometimes, in that kind of way. So, yeah, I mean, I don't see how the draft could work, but your point about what it does, like, what could we do that would take the best aspects of that kind of exposure and prominence that this draft has given these players and do for other leagues? Like, it doesn't have to be a draft. You can get the best elements of a draft and of the experience of watching a draft through some other kind of process, I gotta believe. So, like, I mean, the one that springs to mind straight off the dome is one we've talked about plenty, is like an NRL transfer window. Why not have a kind of free agency period so players aren't leaving and undermining their teams in the middle of a season by signing with another team for next year? Why not have a window where people are bidding and it can be its own event? Like it can be, who the top free agents are going into it, who's going to be able to get those meetings, who's going to be able to get those, even though we know damn well from the NBA, for example, that a lot of those things are decided well ahead of time. There's a lot of tapping up going on, under the table kind of deals in order to players, teams can't lobby players, but other players can lobby players. They just call themselves friends and talk to them on the phone for whatever reason, drop a nudge, wink, wink. There you go. But it still is an event when the first couple days of NBA free agency come along. That's a similar thing. Like you can have little news specials talking about who the top players are leading into it, who the top players are now that they've signed places. Super Rugby have a little bit of this going on in terms of when they announce their squads, but it should be bigger, it should be bolder, it should be a big deal that you've gone from provincial rugby to Super Rugby. That should be like a massive graduation, and that should be rugby is all over the telly anyway, as it is. So they've probably already got a few things, and we don't really need to give rugby any helping hands or anything like that. They're welcome to figure things out in their own. Other sports are trying to compete with them. I think the Black Caps named and the White Ferns both named their squads recently. There's a little bit of thing, but it's still just a press release type of thing. I don't know. I'm just thinking on my feet here, but it seems like there should be plenty of creative ways if you think outside the box in order to take that kind of elemental, the glitz and the glamour, the focus, the prominence of what a draft can offer to the players, to the competition, to the teams specifically, and what that does for fans being able to experience that kind of stuff. It seems like we should be able to bottle that and use that in different ways for other sports.
For sure. We'll move on to your Flying Kiwis and especially this Matt Garbett yarn. But just based off that, what you said there, I think Super Rugby would be the only sport where you can do a draft, and this is why I believe drafts aren't going to work in this part of the world, because all the teams at the professional level invest so much in their junior pathways. So you can't have a player who comes up as a Warriors junior,
exactly,
and plays all junior footy with the Warriors, whether it's under 18, under 20, whatever it is, reserve grade. And then he enters the draft and he gets drafted by someone else. All these sports, especially in New Zealand, are based on, cricket. So you've got the Auckland Aces. So you're going to be an Auckland junior and you're going to come up through the Auckland system and then enter the draft and go somewhere else. That doesn't make sense. Whereas Super Rugby, they aren't necessarily perfectly aligned with their local union. So, Auckland Rugby and the Blues are completely separate entities. So then, that's more suitable to a draft process. And everyone looks to America. Everyone wants the draft and whatever. But American sports, there's no junior LA Lakers system. No, the junior system is college, and those are very separate entities. So then, to enter the NBA, everyone comes in a big pool of draftable players. Whereas in New Zealand, it's like the Premier League. You're not going to have a player who comes up through the Arsenal system. Arsenal invest so much money in that player just to let him enter the draft. None of that makes sense. So it's kind of something that can only live in the realm where there is a separation between the highest level professional teams and the junior systems. Whereas in New Zealand and Australia, those highest level professional teams put a lot of effort into their junior system. So, it's never going to work, really, just straight up. So, but it is an interesting thought and process to go through. Now, Wildcard, I'm just going to let you take the floor here because I don't know much about this Matt Garbett fellow. I've never heard his name before. but he's front and centre of your Flying Kiwis yarn. He's got Rio Ferdinand dropping a comment on the IG post. Who the fuck is Matt Garbett, and what's he doing? What's he doing to command all this attention, Wildcard?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what he's doing in a second. I do want to chuck out a thing about Hannah Wilkinson first, just a quick 30 seconds, because since the last Flying Kiwis, I've already written the thing for next Flying Kiwis, getting ahead of myself, but since you've still got to wait a few days, it's worth chucking out the old context. Here she's signed with a club in Sweden for the upcoming season, which is starting imminently. So she's got to find a way to get from New Zealand to Sweden, which I don't know what the old Air New Zealand are up to these days. It might be a little bit tricky. It might take a little longer than it should. But the team called, I have no idea how to pronounce this, but it's spelled Djurgården, which obviously going back to Sweden, this country she played the top flight in for a couple years with Vizio, and then left to go play in Portugal for a season with Sporting. She left Sporting a little bit early in the season. They ended up being cancelled at that point anyway, just a few weeks later when they finally got around to making that decision. She left in order to come home for lockdown, and so, mentioned on a TVNZ thing a couple of weeks ago, she was close to a new move. Well, there's that new move, going over to sign for a top-flight team in Sweden. Should be good. It's a league that she's well familiar with, a league she's had a little bit of success in the past, and she's also coming off a good spell of form with Sporting, where she scored a lot of goals, which has always been maybe the one main criticism you'd have of old Wilkie, is that she holds the ball up very well. She's a great physical presence as a striker, maybe doesn't get enough goals to show for that. Scored plenty of goals for Sporting, so that's good form to be taken into Sweden. Now, speaking of Sweden, that's actually where Mathew Garbett happens to be right now. So to break it down for you just a little bit, I'll throw out some facts on the situation, because it's a bit of a weird situation here. Matt Garbett, Ole Academy graduate. He was at the Under-17 World Cup last year. He scored at least one goal in that tournament. He, been playing for Western Suburbs with the rest of the Ole dudes in Central League, winning Central League, by the way. And just one of the top, he's a centre forward, one of the top upcoming attacking players that New Zealand has. Signed after that Under-17 World Cup with the team Falkenbergs in the top flight of Sweden. He's already played twice in the League Cup, they play their League Cup as like a group stage leading into knockouts, and the group stage takes place in the pre-season in Sweden. So he played a couple games off the bench there, and then lockdown hit, so everything had a big old break. They're coming back into action. It might even be this weekend, actually. It is, in fact. It is on Tuesday morning at 5 a.m. He's got a game. Whether he plays or not, we'll see, because he's sort of like a fringe first-team player. But, I mean, he's like 18, so this is his first season as a professional player. But right at the end of lockdown there, he changed agencies. He signed with a new agency called New Era Global Sports, who are based out of England. Immediately after that, within the very next day, and then the very next day after that, there came two articles on a website called Footy Insiders 24/7, a website I was not otherwise familiar with. Seemed to be specialists in this kind of transfer gossipy type stuff. First headline: exclusive, evidence sets sights on young centre forward after big development. Second headline: exclusive, Man City sets sights on signing Everton wanted striker after agent deal agreed. Both of those things are referring to the new agent deal. Neither of them mentioning it till about halfway through the article. Articles in which you get words like, where are we? Wonder Kid, rising star, one of the most sought after teenagers in Europe, centre forward sensation. All this transfer gossip type stuff is it just shows it's very formulaic, especially when you get on those kind of sort of blog site type deals where you don't know how much of this gossip is real or what to believe. It seems to me like the major factor of all that is not that Everton might be interested in signing him, not that Manchester City might be interested in signing him. It's the fact that he's changed agencies to an English-based agency who, looking at their lists of clients, and you mentioned Rio Ferdinand was quick on the trigger with his Instagram comment about that. Rio Ferdinand seems to be the most prominent client for this company. He's obviously doing a lot of media stuff these days. I guess that's how you book him, as you go through New Era Global Sports. His brother is also listed on the his brother Anton also listed on the clients list. There's and their cousin Kane as well. So it seems like a bit of a. I'm not sure if there's any kind of ownership deal. I had a little look. I'm not sure if the Ferdinands are putting money into this or if they're just like high-profile clients being used to help sell it on to everyone else. No idea, but an interesting situation altogether. I mean, I'm not too bothered about whether Everton are interested, whether Manchester City are actually whether those things are factual. I will note though that Everton has a number of players, ex and current, who are on the books with this New Era Global Sports. Like, there aren't really any superstars there. They seem to be focusing more on the lower leagues and sort of fringe Premier League talent. But, I mean, they have a few, like Michael Keane, where are we? Neil Taylor, Ashley Williams. There's Farrah Williams as well from the English women's team. Like, there's a few names who Premier League fans would know. But it suggests to me, I mean, first of all, sign him with a big deal agent is a nice development for a Kiwi centre forward on the rise. It shows he's looking about his future. He's thinking of how these things are going to progress for himself. It also shows that I'll see what you reckon on this, but it seems to me, right, that the two articles actually linking him with clubs are probably plans from the agency, right? They're almost certainly just little setups because they've signed this guy. They want to build up his profile. They want to, be able to get him moving for a transfer fee at some point down the line. It seems like that's probably what's happening there, is they're just trying to boost him up by putting his name in the same conversation as, well, not only some of the descriptors they use of him. Before, he was a dude who even a lot of Kiwi football fans won't really know too much about. And then suddenly he's one of the most sought after teenagers in Europe the day after he signs with a new agency. Seems a little bit fishy there. You can kind of smell the fish in the percolator there. It's just a funny situation. I don't know if you got any thoughts on that. The actual transfer speculation seems to be very much of a plant. The changing agencies though, that seems a bit more like a statement of intent, which is a pretty cool situation to have a young Kiwi footballer involved in. And yeah, just to take a slight detour to make a point, by all means, the MLBs they've got their kind of collective bargaining situation. I think there was one recently with NFL players as well, and obviously trying to bounce back from the pandemic. There's financial agreements and all that stuff that has to be sorted out. But it just reminded me of listening to someone like Ryan Russillo or other American podcast people. And a lot of you got to kind of suss out this story is coming from this source, so it's going to have a bias towards the players' union. Yeah, or this story is coming from this source, so it's going to have a bias towards the owners. And I just thought about that when you were talking about the rumors, the transfer rumors. Right, there's so much of that with football transfer stuff. You just got to juggle. Touched on that. Who's kind of written about that. Where's it coming from? Yeah, it's a bit of a hot mess. So, what's your assessment of Matt Garbett as a baller? Obviously, him signing to an English agency, as you alluded to, that's setting him up for a rather positive move or a future. And obviously, such an agency would only sign him if he was good or, obviously promising enough. You're not gonna sign a player and whip up a frenzy for some footballing pleb. You're going to do it for a player who you believe can contribute to a professional team. But considering me and a lot of other people may not have heard about Mathew Garbett, what's your assessment of him as a footballer, and where does he rank on Kiwi footballers even, let alone international footballers? Well, he hasn't been involved in an all-white setup yet, that I can... no, I'm pretty sure he hasn't been. I've only seen him play for the under-17s live, other than like outside of highlights and stuff. Don't live in Wellington, so don't get to get down to any of those Central League or stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, but so speaking on reputation, he's certainly one of the top teenage strikers coming through. That's without doubt, and just the rise he's been on recently is pretty intense as well. Like signing with not just signing with a professional team, but signing with a top flight team in Sweden, and I think there might have been a little connection there involved in terms of the go-between with another famous Ole alumni and Dan Keat, who he might. I'm trying to remember this because it was at the start of the year that this deal was done. I'm pretty sure Dan Keat played for them, so he was probably like back in the day. So it was probably a bit of a go-between there. But I mean, they signed him, so that doesn't make a difference. It's just it's a lot of this like transfer stuff is who you know, and it's just about getting your foot in the door. He's got his foot in the door there. He got out of nowhere. You'd think he'd go straight into the under-19s and the under-21s, or however their teams are structured. Maybe it's the reserve team or whatever. But he went straight into the first team, played a couple times off the bench for them, which is a very good sign that he'll be involved in the first team moving forward. But I mean, talking about future speculation for the fella, he's only just signed his first pro deal. He's only played 2 games. He's got to like continue to push forward and turn those little subs appearances into maybe scoring a goal or two, and then getting the odd start and just building up his profile that way. But like we know already that he's got the media side of things covered. He's got an agent that is going to go out there and bat for him. So if he does the business, it should be. The other thing did I mention this or not? I don't think so. Is basically all of those players from the New Era Global Sports crew of clients, almost all of them based in England or the wider UK. So like Garbett automatically, I don't know what his like his own heritage is. There's a lot of Kiwi footballers who have an English parent or an English grandparent or whatever, which makes it like England therefore is a more feasible option because you can get the work permits and stuff like that, which is always handy. So I don't know what his situation there, but by his choice of agency, it would suggest that if he were like a year or two down the line, if he were to move, England seems like a very likely destination just based on adding 1 and 1 together and making 2, you know?
I do know indeed. Wildcard. We'll do a quick little, I'm not sure if you saw this wildcard. There's a quick little, well, it wasn't a quick little announcement. The announcement was filled with superlatives and all sorts of big words. The Warriors announced a partnership with the Redcliffe Dolphins, and I wrote about this in the email as I said earlier, so I'll just try and, I'm not sure if like you got any immediate thoughts on it, Wildcard?
I know nothing about it. I didn't even hear about it before I got up this morning, and I went for a run, and I came back and started recording. So yeah, break the whole thing down for me.
Well, I also know nothing about it, other than the Warriors have announced a partnership with the Redcliffe Dolphins. In the email, the purpose of writing about it was to try and speculate on like what it might mean, but it was very strange because the Warriors press release didn't mention any logistical details. It didn't mention how this is going to work, the time frame it's going to be like. Because, for example, so Redcliffe Dolphins, they are one of the bigger football clubs, rugby league clubs in the Brisbane region. And that makes them one of the bigger clubs in Queensland's Intra Super Cup, which is the Queensland Reserve Grade competition. So the Warriors usually send a Warriors Reserve Grade team, whether it was the Auckland Vulcans or the Warriors Reserve Grade team. They play in the New South Wales Reserve Grade competition, and now it appears that they will no longer partake in the Canterbury Cup, which is the New South Wales competition, and this partnership with Redcliffe, one would assume, is going to result in the Warriors participating in the Queensland Intrust Super Cup through the Redcliffe Dolphins. Now, the time frame's kind of important because that would be real beneficial this year. The Warriors are based in Australia. Redcliffe's obviously in Australia, so having a place where you could play reserve grade footy while you're stuck in Australia, and perhaps, because it's a two-way relationship, so I assume Redcliffe Dolphins are going to be a minor pipeline of players to serve up to the Warriors if they need them or whatever. That's if it was going down this year, and that's if there was actually reserve grade footy set to be in action. I don't know if that's going to happen. Whether there will be a reserve grade competition in New South Wales and Queensland this year, but yeah, it's a very strange announcement in the sense that there's no details. It's just about celebrating this partnership. And as I wrote in the email, I don't know if it's like a financial decision or a footy development decision, and that's what I kind of wrestled with in the email, because I can see it being a financial decision. Like, the Warriors don't need to, because they've already done it. They've already stopped playing a Jersey flag team and they moved to an SG ball team. So the SG ball team only plays 10 to 12 weeks between February and March, April, as opposed to a Jersey flag under 20s competition, which runs the whole length of the NRL season. So not only is that, so that's a case where it's a lot cheaper to operate an SG ball team than it is to operate a Jersey flag team. But then again, it's also probably more beneficial to the players in the development, because these young players, these under 18 players in New Zealand who are part of the Warriors SG ball team, they're going to be playing against Australian SG ball talent. So instead of those under 18 players just consistently playing local rugby league in Aotearoa age group rugby league, or whatever it is, they get to play against the best 16, 17, 18-year-olds in Australia. So it's also beneficial to the development. So maybe it's a case of both. Maybe it's balancing, well, not even balancing, just a more efficient way of operation. So we save money and it's better for the footy development. That leads to questions of what happens to the players after SG ball. They're too old for SG ball, but there's no under 20s. So suddenly you've got guys moving out of SG ball to play against men. I think that could be very beneficial as well. So I don't even know if that's a negative. And then you look at this Redcliffe Dolphins situation. So it saves a lot of money because the Warriors are not going to have to send a team to partake in the Canterbury Cup. The way I view this is by competing via the Redcliffe Dolphins, the Warriors will only have to send 4 or 5 players to the Redcliffe Dolphins each week. It'll just be the players who are on the fringe of NRL, but they're not required in the squad of 2021 for the NRL game. So the NRL squad of 21, 22, 23 in a non-pandemic impacted world, they'll go play NRL, and then a couple of players will go play Redcliffe Dolphins. And then for some reason, I have a view, a perception, a belief that this can also help Auckland local footy. So I don't know where the Warriors' priorities lie. That's ultimately where I'm trying to get at, because I can see a situation. So you got the NRL squad, you got a couple of dudes who go over and play for Redcliffe Dolphins, and then what happens to the rest of the guys who are in that reserve grade group? Because you can't have 17 reserve graders all going over to Redcliffe. You can, but to me that kind of defeats the whole purpose of aligning with Redcliffe Dolphins, because Redcliffe Dolphins are going to have their own players. So do those players who aren't required for the NRL, they're not required for Redcliffe Dolphins duties, Are they going to go back to playing in Auckland local footy? I think that will be great. And I think that is a possibility that is very encouraging for the local competition. I don't know if the Warriors have that kind of good vibe and goodwill in local footy, though. I'm struggling to pinpoint the priorities because, for example, when Auckland Rugby League had their little ownership situation with the Warriors, then it made sense for the Warriors to be far more in tune with local Auckland Rugby League. But Auckland Rugby League got bought out of that ownership situation. So do the Warriors have the same care factor for local footy? Personally, I think they do. Obviously, I've got no idea how this plays out. Again, just speculating. Because I think what the Warriors are ultimately trying to do is just to have different kind of layers to their development, I think. So to go super deep, this is a Warriors deep cut. They have the Future Warriors, which is under 16. Now, they only play a couple of games a week. They might meet up for training. They have predominantly Auckland players, but also a lot of players from around Aotearoa, whether it's Wellington. They have a relationship with a Rotorua club, Pikio. I don't know what the, like, Jaguars or something. Like, Pikio is a rugby league club in Rotorua. So they have these relationships, and a lot of young players come through up to the Warriors in like last year and this year to play Future Warriors Rugby League. That's under 16. Now they have an SG Ball team, which is under 18. So they play a bunch of games earlier in the year. And the way I see things happening is that the players who are 12 SG Ball, they may, like, unless they're the super talent, top tier talent, if they're the top tier talent straight out of SG Ball, they might go straight into the reserve grade and play Redcliffe Dolphins most weeks. However, the next step after SG Ball, these are all like players who are contracted to the Warriors. So they're always contracted to the Warriors, but if you graduate from SG Ball, the next step for you may be playing against men in Auckland. Now, I think that's fantastic for the development of those young players. And then the next step there is you move into the Redcliffe Dolphins kind of group, where you might play for the Redcliffe Dolphins, or you might, one week if there's an opportunity, or you might play local Auckland footy, and then from the Redcliffe Dolphins kind of group, then you move into the Warriors NRL group. So I think if that's how it plays out, that's really, I think that's a good way of rejigging the development pathway, because the reason I have a belief that getting the young players to play against men sooner is better, because you look back at the under-20s competition, the Warriors had an under-20s dynasty, and they would just chuck the players. So you go high school, probably playing first 15 rugby, then you come into the Warriors under-20s team, and then from there, they used to just put those under-20s players straight into the NRL. And that never worked, because the Warriors under-20s dynasty never resulted in an NRL dynasty. There's absolutely no correlation between the Warriors under-20s success and Warriors NRL success. So now, I think there's more layers to it, and there's exceptional talent might miss or skip a step, but there's kind of a step-by-step process to a player's development. And the reason I come to that conclusion is because they've got a smart operator who I believe is leading this, and that's Peter O'Sullivan. So Peter O'Sullivan was part of like the Warriors kind of recruitment drive in their backroom staff. And, you know, Brian Smith isn't here anymore. He got the flick. So I don't know what kind of influence he has on this. But Peter O'Sullivan, who is now the Warriors recruitment guru, he's in charge of recruiting the juniors. He's in charge of, I believe he's in charge of like getting players from Australian clubs as well. So he was involved with the Roosters and Storm at some stage, but more recently the Roosters. So that's why you have some of these Roosters guys like Josh Curran, Jackson Frey, Adam Pompey, Pawasa Fa'amasili. I believe that the Peter O'Sullivan presence played a major role in getting those players to the Warriors. He seems like a real smart operator. Like, he's had experience with the Storm. The Storm have 2 reserve grade teams in Queensland, East Tigers and Sunshine Coast Falcons. We've also seen the Roosters more recently. They've established a relationship with Central Coast. So they have the Central Coast Roosters Junior Club. And those are both former clubs of Peter O'Sullivan. Like, he's not in charge of those things because he was there a long time ago. But that's like, it just feels like he's a smart footy operator who has completely revamped the development pipeline and the pathways for those players. And I think his fingerprints are all over this. But that's just all my imagination. Like, there's absolutely no details in what the Warriors release, so that just leaves me to speculate. How do you perceive all of that wildcard?
Yeah, it sounds like it's high on speculation, low on facts on account of what's been served up, which is always tricky to try figure that out. It's like it seems to me like, because there's no reserve grade football at the moment, is there? Because only the NRL has come back at the moment from the pandemic and stuff like that. Because I know that's been an issue with some of these like Dragons undercurrent things. Like, now apparently bloody Tristan Saylor's hoping to leave because he's not getting any rugby league. He's not in the first grade team, and there's no reserves to play for. He's like, well, if I could play first grade somewhere else, I'd rather do that. And that's a bit of a disaster because he's a player I ever. He's one of those fellas, kind of Wendell's son, by the way, for people listening there. He's one of those dudes who's been coming up for a little while, and he looks like he played a couple games towards the end of last season. He looks like he's gonna be a legit dude, perhaps not quite there yet, but like, I can't understand how he hasn't even got a look in yet this season when it's not like the team's exactly doing fantastically. But so like the lack of reserve grade games there is something that's been on my mind, so perhaps I'm bringing that to the table, fairly or unfairly, I don't know, but like, ordinarily the Warriors with New South Wales Cup stuff would have a squad of about 18 to 20 players or something each week, wouldn't they, from like below the first grade team who would be getting games there? Would that be about right? Yeah,
with a crossover between the NRL squad.
Yeah, right. Does that include players who are like, wouldn't it? Players who are in the wider squad but not in the 17 would probably get a chance to play that as well, I guess. So that's a little extra crossover, but still, like, those guys need games, right? So it seems like if you're then cutting that to potentially only half or maybe even less of those players who are going to get games per week, then you're kind of shrinking that top tier not the top tier, but the tier just below that. You're kind of shrinking that in terms of like your depth for when those NRL guys get injured. Would seem like that would be a bit of an issue, but I mean, I just can't get past the idea. Like, my first impression and thinking about it throughout this chat, I can't think of anything different. It's surely just with the state of the world at the moment. I can't think it's not a financial decision. First and foremost, it'll have benefits and whatever the opposite of benefits are. I'm stumbling here, but like, the benefits, it'll have deficiencies for player development. But I got to think that the finances are the things that would make it work. Like, would make this one work over the possibility of others. And that's not just a Warriors thing either. That's also probably a Dolphins thing as well. Is how do we, like, how does a team below the NRL level survive when at the moment they're not even playing? They're like, their top team isn't even getting games at the moment. What are they supposed to do with an entire year off and the troubles that brings along? So it's probably Well, hopefully at least. I mean, that's the thing with the sort of bland press releases, is there's nothing more frustrating than when you get like that hint, but you don't get the actual bloody substance to it. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? It's sort of like this is a slight reach, but I don't think it's as much of a reach as it sounds to start with. It's sort of like how you get a lot of big corporations and stuff talking about doing the Blackout Tuesday and stuff the other day, and like putting out their statements. We here at insert random brand believe that all people are creative equally, and it's important. Blah blah blah. Social struggle. Blah blah blah. Black Lives Matter. It's like, cool. So, which charities did you donate to this week? None. Oh, okay. All right. So we didn't actually really do anything with this statement, did we? Now. It sounds just a little bit like that, but I hope at least it is a mutually beneficial decision on both clubs' parts here.
Oh, I reckon that's pretty safe. Like, you're not signing a partnership like that where it's not mutually. It's just more like whether is this for this year or is it for next year? Like, how it's all a bit confusing.
Yeah,
but
thinks it would be nice to know.
Yeah. All right, Wildcard. We'll hit our last little story here. Daryl Mitchell, Northern District's Knights all-rounder, moving to Canterbury, which seems like a lifestyle decision. And that's fine. As far as Daryl Mitchell going to Canterbury and how he fits into the Canterbury team, I think there is a bit of an opening. Like Canterbury, I think Stephen Murdoch retired, so they've lost a batsman there. They've got a fairly young batting group, and Daryl Mitchell will fit into that. They don't really have because Andrew Ellis retired as well, so now they don't really have a seam bowling all-rounder. So effective, like Andrew Ellis didn't play a lot of cricket, like didn't play all formats in last summer or last few summers. So I think Daryl Mitchell is filling that role. Seamer, who can bat as well. And then thinking just with the pandemic impact, maybe some of the Black Caps are going to be playing more domestic cricket, which would be great. And there's not much room for Daryl Mitchell, apparently, in Northern District's Knights. I just think this is purely I don't really think this is a cricketing decision. I think it's just a lifestyle decision. With young family partners from Canterbury and whatnot, and it just suits his, needs and wants at this time. How do you think this will be good for Mitchell? Like, Mitchell climbed through the ranks to make a Black Caps Test debut while he was at the Knights, and I don't know how much of that is due to the Knights. I don't know how much of that is due to Daryl Mitchell's, skill and perseverance and all that. But there is, so how do you view this move for Daryl Mitchell? And I would suggest, because John Bracewell is no longer the coach of the Knights. The Knights advertised their head coaching role for the Northern District's Knights. So there is a bit of change coming with the Knights. They also had Gareth Hopkins as their T20 coach, and I think they finished last in the Super Smash off the top of my head. So I think the Knights actually finished last in 2 competitions, Super Smash and Ford Trophy, maybe, or Super Smash and Plunket Shield. So there is that factor. How do you view this move for Mitchell? Like, do you think it's going to blast him into, further up the pecking order with the Black Caps, or do you think it's one of those moves where, from a cricketing perspective, it kind of puts a limit on your potential? Like, how do you just assess that?
Well, I tell you what, I mean, I didn't know the stuff about his partner being from the region or things like that, which does suggest lifestyle, yeah, for sure. Like, it's certainly a big part, but at the same time, I don't think it would have to be. Like, I think if you because those things are true, then it probably means that's your major factor involved here. But at the same time, this could be purely a cricketing decision, and I think it would be, to be honest, an absolutely brilliant one for him. I think this is like, you've seen a fair few like Black Caps moving around different regions in recent years. Generally, it's the trend of them going to Northern Districts, not away from Northern Districts. So I think it's pretty, or if not there, it's to bloody Auckland, who've signed a couple. Like, you think of Kyle Jamieson going from Canterbury to Auckland at a time when he was pushing through trying to get to Black Caps status. And Daryl Mitchell is already at Black Cap status, but he's stuck behind Colin de Gronholm in the pecking order of the test stuff. He's could play alongside de Gronholm in 2020 stuff, but he probably needs to just amp up his case a little bit more. Don't think he's played any ODI cricket, but it is a possibility down the line. I think Canterbury is like dead set perfect for him. This is a genuinely like exciting transfer. I don't think it'll like halt him in any way, because like when he playing for Northern Districts, he's a dude who came up with them. That's a bit different than like signing with Canterbury. Canterbury know they've signed a Black Caps player, so they're gonna hold him in a different kind of light. Like you said, Andy Ellis has just retired. He has been phasing out his cricket for the last couple of years, but for the last decade, Andy Ellis has been one of the best performers across all formats really for Canterbury, in a role which Daryl Mitchell was going to do that exact, like it's a perfect mold for him to just slide straight in. Like the role is already there for him with this team. He gets to go in with a lot of like, you know, quite a few young fellas around him where he gets to be a leader. And we know he's a guy who has some leadership capabilities, because I think he's done some captaining with some of the New Zealand A sides and stuff in the past, hasn't he? I think he might have captained ND a few times as well. I think that's true. So to just like, in terms of everything, and this also puts the pressure on de Gronholm, where he's not competing with him for places in Northern Districts, he's competing with him for Black Caps places. And de Gronholm is a guy who can be a bit inconsistent. We know his 2020 stuff from what, like some of the stuff both of us have been writing over recent times, not great. Like he's been pretty he's a little bit vulnerable in that position, and that position is mostly as a batsman, so it's a little bit of a different thing to what Mitchell would be looking at. But we know that like direct, when de Gronholm missed the test against England, Mitchell came in for test debut. Like that's a specific role as that sort of seam bowling all-rounder in the test team. If Mitchell wants that role, he has to take it off de Gronholm. Like they're like for like there. It just seems like this is a situation which in all aspects suits Daryl Mitchell down to the bloody floor. And that's exciting, because that's the kind of situation therefore which should get the best out of him. Get the best out of him. It's going to demand the best out of de Gronholm. Get the best out of de Gronholm. Everything, like everyone wins, you know. It's just one of those situations where it just seems like everything's dispersed in the right kind of way to where like let the best man win kind of thing. And at the very least, Canterbury have signed a very dependable, reliable player to across all three formats who can do a lot of good things for them. So it's yeah, I bloody love this move. I think it's great on basically all levels.
It does set up a fascinating battle for the seam bowling all-rounder spot, because you mentioned Colin de Gronholm, Jimmy Neesham might be a factor. I don't want to put Kyle Jamieson in that bracket just yet, but he definitely showed us that he can bat, and he definitely showed us that he can bowl. So like he's an up-and-comer coming into that equation. I'm just thinking like seam bowling all-rounders. You've got Colin de Gronholm with the Knights. Maybe Corey Anderson barely plays domestic cricket, so I don't really want to categorise him with these folk who are actually playing. Auckland Aces maybe have Kyle Jamieson. CD Staggs, the best I can think of there is Willem Luddick, who hasn't scored a whole lot of runs recently. One of the best seamers in the Plunkett Shield. Obviously, the Wellington Firebirds, they got the big dog Jimmy Neesham. Otago Volts have Nathan Smith, who is someone to watch out for, and then Canterbury coming in with Daryl Mitchell. So it's from that perspective, it's definitely a three-pronged race, three-headed beast. You got Daryl Mitchell, Colin de Gronholm, and Jimmy Neesham. And then maybe Kyle Jamieson and, to a lesser extent, Nathan Smith trying to factor into that. It also sets up like you mentioned, Daryl Mitchell replacing Colin de Gronholm. Like for like, horses for horses and all that shit. I wonder, so you've got that battle. You've got the battle of the seam bowling all-rounders. I wonder about not so much the battle between seam bowling all-rounders and spin bowling all-rounders, but the dynamic and the tension between seam bowling all-rounders and spin bowling all-rounders, because I think you've got some very good spin bowling all-rounders in Aotearoa as well. The likes of, not necessarily dominant, oh my God, he's in the black caps every game, or he's going to be a black cap every game, but as we've alluded to, like, you've got a lot of the best spinners were, spin bowling all-rounders. Guys like Dean Foxcroft, guys like Brad Schmullian, guys like Mitchell Santner, Michael Bracewell, Rachin Ravindra. Like, a lot of these up-and-coming cricketers, Glenn Phillips can fucking bowl these days. Like, there's so many good, talented cricketers who bat and also bowl. Like, you can get a couple of overs maybe if they're, like, I don't want to say Glenn Phillips is going to be an international spinner. Let's talk more about a domestic level. So all these dudes can be counted on to bowl domestic overs of spin. So that presents a situation where it might be less about, like, are you a seamer or a spinner? It's more about, okay, you score lots of runs, you're a quality batsman, and regardless of what you bowl, I can get 5 overs out of you, in a Plunkett Shield game. So I think as far as the seam bowling all-rounders go, it's Neesham, de Grandhomme, and Mitchell. They're competing, and pretty much across all formats they're competing, because they all whack the ball very hard in T20 cricket, and they've shown at various points that they can bat in Test cricket as well, and do a job with the ball if called upon. But there's also a lot of talent in the spin bowling batsman department. So it's less about, like, what kind of bowling are you going to do, and more about who gives me the most effective bowling option, whether it's seam or spin. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic in Aotearoa cricket right now.
And that's the way it should be too, eh? Like, it doesn't matter what you're bowling, it's just how well you're bowling. And there's perhaps one of those criticisms of the Black Caps. Maybe it's maybe not quite as bad at the moment as it has been a couple years ago, maybe, is that they're just a little too rigid in terms of the roles. They're picking players for roles rather than picking players for the players that they are, which was a very, very Brendan McCullum thing. And then you saw afterwards, like, for example, the amount of players that, I think of Luke Ronke at the Champions Trophy, first of all, being picked to be Brendan McCullum. Like, just pushed into open and saying, like, you be Brendan McCullum, give us that pinch hitting thing. It's like, well, it doesn't work unless you've got Brendan McCullum, kind of thing. Like, and the irony is that Brendan McCullum is the first dude who'd be out there saying, like, pick players to play to their strengths, do what, like, trust your own game, trust what got you to this point, those kind of things, rather than changing things up there. And there's no reason why. I mean, there's the obvious one when we're talking about this is picking Mitchell Santner as an all-rounder for as long as they did, without him getting the success with the bat. And when he finally did score 100, it was right as his bowling was finally, like, running out of patience in terms of the wicket take and stuff. So they have now presumably the number one spinner, and it seems like this is beyond doubt. Like, this is basically confirmed at this point. Number one Test spinner is Ajaz Patel, who is not a bunny with the bat, but he's probably batting at 10 with Bolt at 11 in the situation. So that does maybe put a little more pressure on an all-rounder, and Colin de Grandhomme can be rocks or diamonds, which is what you love about Colin de Grandhomme. That's why he's batting in that role. But yeah, no, it's an interesting one to keep an eye on, isn't it? How these different fellas just sort of strike the balance, I suppose. Plus, let's not also, it would be remiss of me by past reputation not to mention the fact that moving to Canterbury also puts him in Gary Stead's region, for Daryl Mitchell's case at least. And I'm not suggesting there would be any kind of bias in terms of selections or anything like that. but it doesn't hurt his case. I have actually gone kind of the opposite. Like, I've liked to joke about that in the past, but people have actually been saying that in public, that there's a sort of Canterbury versus ND thing dynamic going on, and that's actually driven me a little bit crazy to where I feel like I can't really. My jokes have been spoilt in that regard, because I don't actually think there's anything going on there, which makes that whole thing very weird and just generally strange. But that's probably one we don't need to get into.
If that was the case, why the fuck would anyone move from the Knights to Gary Stead? Because you're essentially moving from Kane Williamson to Gary Stead.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if you've come up, like, Daryl Mitchell, he's Waikato to the bone. Like, he did spend time growing up in Australia, but he also, when his father was playing for Waikato and coaching, he was in the Waikato region. So he is Northern Districts, like, hard out. So he came up playing, not necessarily came up, but like when he was coming through the Knights, he would have played a shitload of cricket with Kane Williamson and all those other Black Caps as well. So, like, according to this Black Cap split stuff, you've got someone who has played a lot of cricket with Kane Williamson in the same team as Kane Williamson, the same association and province as Kane Williamson, and he's moving to the dark side. He's moving to Gary Stead's team. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, the drama doesn't make any sense at all. I'm glad you highlighted that one, Wildcard, and I think that's a nice place for us to wrap this up. So enjoy the wiggling of sports coming back into our lives, and we'll be back early next week to wrap up some NRL footy and then any other Kiwi sporting news from the weekend as well. Kia kaha, raise your mana, and stay beautiful. Cha-cha-cha.